Welcome back in our third session. And in this session, we'll be talking about knowledge management and corporate social responsibility. The knowledge management is a developing field. A lot of work has already been done in that regard. And the modern corporate world is always talking about the knowledge management because its major emphasis is that we should not be reinventing the wheel. We should always be coming up with creativity and innovation. There should always be the efforts to preserve the knowledge which is specifically kept by the people. So that's the reason that when we talk about knowledge in terms of knowledge management terminologies, we talk about tacit knowledge and explicit knowledge. The tacit knowledge is something kept in the minds of the people, and the explicit knowledge is something which is documented, which is recorded. And the major transition between this tacit knowledge to explicit knowledge is the major challenge as well. So as we were talking about human capital management considerations, remember that there are three basic considerations. The first one is you cannot manage unless you measure. The second consideration is, but the measures must be meaningful. And the third consideration in human capital management is that they must lead to action. Now we're going to correlate these human capital management considerations with knowledge management principles. And for that context, let's define what is knowledge management. Knowledge management is about storing and sharing the wisdom, which is a superlative degree of knowledge, understanding the expertise accumulated in an organization about its processes, techniques, and operations, and it treats knowledge as a key resource. And obviously, that wisdom and knowledge is all carried by the human. So the knowledge management is defined as any process or practice of creating, acquiring, capturing, sharing, and using knowledge wherever it resides to enhance learning and performance in organizations. Significance of knowledge management is that knowledge has become a direct competitive advantage for companies selling ideas and relationships. There are certain concerns of knowledge management as well, which would obviously move along with the concerns related to human capital management as well. And the concerns of KMR, the development of firm-specific knowledge and skills that are the result of organizational learning processes. The second concern is stocks of knowledge, including expertise and encoded knowledge in computer systems. The third context can be flows of knowledge, the way in which knowledge is translated from people to people and from people to a knowledge database. And that can also be termed as tacit to tacit transfer or tacit to explicit transfer. And then transferring knowledge resources by identifying relevant information and then disseminating it so that learning can take place. So these are the major concerns of knowledge management. Now, when we talk about the concept of knowledge, as I was telling you, that knowledge is either explicit or tacit. And no doubt, knowledge is derived from experience, exposure, and education, as we defined it earlier in our sessions. So the explicit knowledge can be codified. It is recorded and available and is held in databases, in corporate intranets, and intellectual property portfolios. And tacit knowledge exists in people's minds. It is difficult to articulate in writing and is acquired through personal experience. The main challenge in knowledge management is how to turn tacit knowledge into explicit knowledge. And sometimes in that transition, a major part of the knowledge can be lost as well. So the knowledge can be stored in data banks and found in presentations, reports, libraries, policy documents, and manuals. It can be moved around the organization through information systems and by traditional methods such as workshops, seminars, courses, publications, videos, tapes, and the intranet. Now, there are certain knowledge management strategies which are very important for us to consider in terms of human resource management as well. So the knowledge management strategies would include, number one, the codification strategy, which is talking about the knowledge is carefully codified and stored in databases where it can be accessed and used easily by anyone in the organization. Knowledge is explicit and is codified using a people to document approach. This strategy is therefore document driven, and the knowledge is extracted from the person who developed it, made independent of that person, and reused for various purposes. So that's the first strategic concern in which we talk about codification of the strategy related to knowledge. The second relationship we can have in knowledge management context, and that is the personalization strategy, in which knowledge is closely tied to the person who has developed it and shared mainly through direct person-to-person contacts. This is a person-to-person approach that involves sharing tacit knowledge. The exchange is achieved by creating networks and encouraging face-to-face communication between individuals and teams by means of informal conferences, workshops, communities of interest, and obviously brainstorming and one-to-one sessions as well. Remember, the codification strategy is the most common, but the personalization strategy is just as important and is often neglected. Now, how HR can contribute to knowledge management? We have got 10 steps for that. The first one is help to develop an open culture in which the values and norms emphasize the importance of sharing knowledge. The second concern can be promote a climate of commitment and trust, which is very important. The third is advise on the design and development of organizations that facilitate knowledge sharing through networks and communities of practice, groups of people who share common concerns about aspects of their work and teamwork. The fourth point, which is talking about that how HR can contribute to knowledge management, is advise on resourcing policies and provide resourcing services that ensure that valued employees who can contribute to knowledge creation and sharing are attracted and retained. The fifth point is advice on methods of motivating people to share knowledge and of rewarding those who do so. The sixth aspect related to how HR can contribute to knowledge management is talking about help in the development of performance management processes that focus on the development of sharing knowledge. The seventh is developing processes of organizational and individual sharing that will generate and assist in disseminating knowledge. And the eighth point is set up and organize workshops, conferences, seminars, and symposia that enable knowledge to be shared and on a person-to-person basis. The ninth important point is, in conjunction with IT, develop systems that capture and, as far as possible, codify explicit and tacit knowledge. And the 10th, last but not the least point, which is talking about how HR can contribute to knowledge management, is that generally promote the cause of knowledge management with senior managers to encourage them to exert leadership and support knowledge management initiatives. Now, the next topic of our focus is related to corporate social responsibility. So the meaning of corporate social responsibility is that CSR refers to the actions taken by businesses that further some social good beyond the interest of the firm and that which is required by law. And the second concern can be, it is concerned with the impact of business behavior on society and can be regarded as a process of integrating business and society. There are certain CSR activities, and the CSR activities include, number one, incorporating social characteristics or features into products and manufacturing processes. The second important thing is adopting progressive human resource management practices. And the third CSR activity can be achieving higher levels of environmental performance through recycling and pollution abandonment. And the fourth concern can be advancing the goals of community organizations. Now, looking at the rationale for the CSR, there are two arguments related to the CSR. And the first argument is there is a moral imperative for businesses to do the right thing without regard to how such decisions affect firm performance. And that is obviously talking more in terms of the social issues. So there is a social issue argument. And the second argument behind the rationale of CSR is that firms can achieve competitive advantage by tying CSR activities to primary stakeholders, and that would be known as the stakeholders argument. So these are the two concerns, the social issues argument and the stakeholders argument. Now, when we are developing a CSR strategy, these are the concerns we need to focus upon. The first concern is identify the areas in which CSR activities might take place by reference to their relevance in the business context of the organization and an evaluation of their significance to share and stakeholders. The second aspect in relation with CSR strategy is prioritize as necessary on the basis of an assessment of the relevance and significance of CSR to the organization and its stakeholders, and the practicalities of introducing the activity or practice. The third aspect can be draw up the strategy and make the case for it to top management and the stakeholders in order to obtain their approval. The fourth concern is that communicate information on the strategy comprehensively and regularly. And last but not the least aspect related to the CSR strategy is talking about providing training to employees on the skills that they need to use in implementing their CSR strategy. Now, the next concern we have is related to the employee relations. When we use the word employee relations, it is defined as that employee relations consist of all those areas of human resource management that involves relationships with employees directly with or through collective agreements when trade unions are organized. So under the concern of employee relations, we can come up with the labor relations, the collective bargaining agents, the labor laws, the labor code procedures, and our association with the employees involved related to an organization. So in that context, remember that we have a psychological contract, and the psychological contract expresses the combination of beliefs held by an individual and their employer about what they expect of one another. And these expectations are reciprocal, but they are unwritten. And when dealing with people, we have to be careful that there are certain trust issues which would be defining and sorting out our psychological contract. And that is the same trust we need to maintain when we'll be dealing with the CBAs, the collective bargaining agents, and the labor unions. That is the same trust, which is the bridge between the management and the union. And that is the same trust which can lead the organization towards its sustainability. So there are certain elements of employee relations we need to focus upon. The first element is the management of employment relationship, generally through the organization's formal and informal employment practices. The second element is the informal as well as the formal processes that take place in the shape of continuous interactions between line managers and individuals and their representatives. The third issue is the development, negotiation, and application of formal systems and rules of collective bargaining and handling disputes, as I was telling you. And the creation of an employee relations climate that is acceptable to all parties and includes the development of mutual trust, openness, and the maintenance of harmonious relationships. Now, in that context, employee relations policies are very important, and we should be considering these things when we are there to manage the people. So the first aspect is trade union recognition. So whether the unions be recognized or de-recognized, we have to look at our policy and the state laws. Collective bargaining, which will be talking about the areas to be covered and the extent to which it should be centralized. Then employee relations procedures, which would be talking about the nature and the scope of procedures for redundancy, grievance handling, and discipline. In association with employee relations policies, there is concern of employee voice, which means the extent to which the organization is prepared to give employees a voice on matters that concern them. Then in relation with partnership, the extent to which a partnership approach is believed to be desirable. When we talk about the employment relationship, the extent to which terms and conditions of employment should be governed by collective agreements or based on individual contracts of employment. And obviously that would be in relation with the collectivism and the individualism prevalent over there. Then harmonization of terms, which is talking about the extent to which the terms and conditions of employment or for staff and manual workers should be harmonized. And again, the working arrangements are very important to be considered, which would be talking about the degree to which management has the prerogative to determine working arrangements. Now, talking in terms of collective agreements, the following points should be considered always. Number one, procedural agreements set out the respective duties and responsibilities of managers and unions. So those procedures should always be sorted out, and the steps through which they make joint decisions and the procedure to be followed if they fail to agree. The purpose is to regulate the behavior of the parties to the agreements, although they are not legally enforceable. The second important thing to be counted is that substantive agreements set out agreed terms and conditions of employment, and we should be very careful when we are developing those agreements. And partnership agreements involve both parties, management and trade unions, agreeing to work together to their mutual advantage and to achieve a climate of more cooperative and therefore less adversarial industrial relations. So managing with the trade unions, remember that the general trends are that management in general, there are exceptions, and that would include, learn to live with unions, just as unions learn to live with management, because both parties recognize that neither would benefit from a climate of hostility or confrontation. So it's a win-win situation we need to evolve. Second issue is, are content to cooperate with unions, but they give industrial relations a lower priority. And obviously, the general trend that the management in general focusing is feel it easier to continue to work with a union because it provides a useful, well-established channel for the handling of grievance, discipline, and safety issues. And remember, that is the legal right of the employees and the workers to form unions, as we have the law in Pakistan as well, which is IRO, Industrial Relations Ordinance, which gives the right to the workers to formulate a union, and which is also defining the procedures of establishing CBAs and labor courts. So when we have to manage without trade unions, these things can be considered important. So the third workshop, Industrial Relations Survey, in association with Industrial Relations Ordinance and in Industrial Relations context, established that the characteristics of union-free employee relations were: number one, the employee relations were generally seen by managers as better in the non-union sector than in the union sector. Strikes were almost unheard. Labor turnover was high, but absenteeism was no worse. Pay levels were generally set unilaterally by management. The dispersion of pay was higher. It was more market related and there was more performance related pay. There was also a greater incidence of low pay. In general, no alternative forms of employee representation existed as a substitute for trade union representation. The employee relations were generally conducted with a much higher degree of informality than in the unionized sector. Managers generally felt unconstrained in the way in which they organize work. There was more flexibility in the use of labor, and employees were more likely to be dismissed in non-union firms, and the incidence of compulsory redundancy was higher. So these were the issues related with organizations when they are managing without trade unions. So that would conclude our today's session. And inshallah, we'll be coming up with new discussions in the next session. If you have any questions, you can always ask them on the WhatsApp group. Jazakallah khair for joining us today.